There is a highway sign in southwestern Virginia that most drivers pass without a second glance. It says 600 feet. It is not a distance to an exit. It is not a distance to a rest stop. It is the exact visibility threshold the Virginia Department of Transportation uses to decide, automatically in real time, whether to cut the speed limit on this road from 65 miles an hour down to 30. 600 feet is roughly 2 football fields. At highway speed, that is less than 5 seconds. Somewhere behind that sign, invisible on a clear day, sits a ridge that can erase an entire highway from view faster than most drivers can react to it, and a system of cameras, sensors, and fiber optic cable built specifically because state officials ran out of other ideas. And every single day, on this exact stretch of Interstate 77, professional truck drivers look at the sky ahead, look at their brakes, look at the clock, and quietly decide whether they are willing to be here after dark, not because a company policy told them to think about it. Because the mountain has taught enough of them, the hard way, exactly what waits for the ones who don't. This is Fancy Gap. Before we go further, a quick favor. If roads like this one, ordinary on paper and dangerous in practice, are the kind of story you want more of, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you've ever driven a stretch of highway that made you grip the wheel a little tighter than usual. Now, back to the mountain. Interstate 77 runs nearly 600 miles, from South Carolina up through Virginia and West Virginia into Ohio. For most of that distance, it is the most forgettable kind of American highway. 4 lanes, gentle curves, the kind of road you drive without remembering a single mile of it. Then, about 7 miles north of the North Carolina line, in Carroll County, Virginia, the ground underneath it changes its mind. The Blue Ridge Escarpment rises here, sudden and steep. The seam where the rolling Piedmont ends and the Appalachian Highlands begin. The interstate has no way around it. So it climbs straight through it, and for 6 miles, everything about the drive is different. 6 miles. 1,500 feet of elevation gain. A summit just over 3,000 feet, with the community of Fancy Gap itself sitting near 2,900. A sustained grade of roughly 4.5% to 5%, with sharper pitches folded inside it. Not the steepest grade on the interstate system. Steep enough, though, that when engineers built this stretch, finishing it in 1977 after moving more than 18 million cubic yards of earth and rock, one of the largest excavation projects in the history of the American interstate system. They added something most highways never need. 3 runaway truck ramps carved into the southbound shoulder. Gravel and sand built for one purpose only, to give a driver with no brakes left somewhere to go that isn't straight through the guardrail. Picture what an 80,000-pound tractor trailer is actually doing on a grade like this. Gravity does not care about your schedule. For 6 miles southbound, it pulls on every one of those 80,000 pounds continuously, and the only thing standing between a controlled descent and a catastrophe is friction. Brake shoes clamping onto drums getting hotter with every second the driver's foot is on the pedal. Ride the brakes too hard for too long, and heat wins. Heat turns to smoke. Smoke means the brakes are dying. That process has a name in the industry: brake fade. The friction material in the drum loses its grip as the temperature climbs, so the same amount of pressure on the pedal produces less and less actual stopping force. Right up until the point where the pedal goes nearly to the floor and the truck is still not slowing down the way it should. Professional drivers are trained to avoid ever reaching that point in the first place by gearing down before the descent begins and letting the engine itself do most of the work. A technique that uses the engine's own compression to hold the truck's speed down without touching the wheel brakes at all. It is loud when it engages, a hard mechanical stutter that some drivers compare to gunfire. And it is one of the only tools that can carry a loaded rig 6 miles downhill without ever cooking the drums. But fatigue does not care about training, and neither does a delivery schedule running 2 hours behind. When the brakes finally go, there is no negotiating with an 80,000-pound truck on a 5% grade. There is only the ramp if the driver reaches it in time, or the guardrail if he doesn't. Northbound has its own hazard, slower and less dramatic but constant. The interstate gives the weakest trucks a third lane for the full climb, a dedicated crawl lane so a rig grinding uphill at 35 miles an hour doesn't turn into a rolling wall for everyone behind it. Before the interstate existed, the older road over this same ridge, U.S. Route 52, was considered dangerous enough that regulators eventually banned any truck over 8 tons from taking it southbound at all. Think about what that means. Decades before I-77 was built, the state already knew this exact grade was too much for heavy trucks to descend safely on the old road. And its solution was simply not to let them. The interstate was supposed to make that restriction obsolete. It made the curves safer. It could not touch the one hazard that actually matters most here. And the volume passing through has only grown. Traffic counts along this stretch near the North Carolina border run between roughly 32 and 36,000 vehicles a day. And legal filings citing state transportation data put the share of vehicles pulling a trailer right here at Fancy Gap at close to 30%. On an ordinary weekday, that means thousands of tractor trailers make this exact climb and this exact descent, most of them without incident. Some of them close enough to a runaway ramp to remember it for the rest of their careers. That hazard doesn't come from the road at all. It comes from the sky. Here is the mechanism, and it is worth understanding because it explains everything that follows. The Blue Ridge Escarpment runs mostly southwest to northeast for hundreds of miles. At Fancy Gap, it briefly twists to run almost east to west. That single geographic accident changes everything. When moist air rides up from the Atlantic or the Gulf on a south or southeast wind, it slams directly into that east-west wall instead of sliding along it the way it would anywhere else on the ridge. The air has nowhere to go but up. As it climbs, it cools. As it cools, it condenses. What forms is fog, thick, localized, sitting almost exclusively over this one stretch of interstate while the roads on either side of it stay completely clear. Drivers who have been through it describe it the same way, over and over. One moment, an ordinary overcast afternoon. The next, a wall. Your headlights hit gray and bounce straight back at you, and everything you were relying on a second earlier, the taillights ahead. The lane lines, your own sense of your speed, stops being reliable all at once. The wind makes it worse. When it blows hard out of the south, the same mountain wall that traps the moisture also funnels the wind itself. A tunnel effect strong enough to push gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour straight along the roadway. A state transportation engineer who studied this exact behavior once put it in plain terms: the wind concentrates at a specific point along the corridor, and if it catches an empty trailer running wide open at the wrong moment, it can tip that trailer over before the driver even has time to react. An empty trailer, riding high and light with no cargo to weigh it down, is exactly the kind of vehicle most vulnerable to that push. So picture the full stack of what a driver descending Fancy Gap in the wrong conditions is actually managing. all at the same time. A grade steep enough to cook his brakes, fog dense enough to erase the road in front of him, wind strong enough to roll an unloaded trailer onto its side. Researchers who have studied this exact 12-mile corridor put the odds of dense fog here at roughly 1 day in 3 across the year. That is not bad luck. That is a standing appointment with the weather that this mountain keeps, whether anyone is ready for it or not. Ask the drivers who actually run this stretch for a living on the forums where they trade notes across the country. And Fancy Gap comes up in the same breath as the names every long-haul driver already knows. Cabbage Hill, Donner Pass, Wolf Creek Pass. The short list of grades experienced drivers plan around instead of simply driving through. Some talk about it with a kind of hard-earned respect, the sense that the mountain is manageable if you know it, and dangerous if you don't. Others are blunter about it. The kind of driver who says flatly that it's a hill he thinks about every time he approaches it, no matter how many times he's already come down it clean. There's a recurring argument on those same threads, too, about whether the posted speed itself is even the right number for a loaded rig on that grade. Some drivers insisting 65 is simply too fast for an 80,000-pound truck to stop safely if the driver ahead makes a bad decision. Others answering that the problem was never the number on the sign, but the discipline of the driver reading it. Neither side is wrong, exactly. That reputation isn't printed anywhere official. It gets passed driver to driver, and a road does not earn a reputation like that by being ordinary. None of this is new. Either the old nickname for this mountain, back when the road was Route 52 instead of I-77, was Killer Mountain. During the winter of 1972 alone, 9 people died on that older, narrower crossing, a toll bad enough that a Virginia newspaper later called it, without exaggeration, the most dangerous mountain passage in the state. The interstate replaced the hairpins with modern engineering. It could not replace the weather. The danger didn't go away. It just changed shape and moved from the curves to the visibility. You can watch that shift play out across 5 decades in a pattern that repeats with grim consistency. 1977, the very year the new interstate opened. A fog-related pileup already on the brand-new road. The year 2000, a chain reaction crash tears through roughly 60 vehicles, killing 2 people. 10 years later, 2010, 75 vehicles this time, 2 more dead. By the Roanoke Times count, this stretch had already seen at least 6 major multi-vehicle pileups since 1997 alone, before the next one arrived. That is 6 mass casualty events in 16 years, on a single 6-mile section of interstate, before the crash that finally made the national news. That next one is the one most people remember, if they remember Fancy Gap at all. Easter Sunday, March 31st, 2013, just after 1:15 in the afternoon. Dense fog had been sitting over the mountain for hours. Virginia State Police had electronic warning signs flashing since before 6 that morning, telling drivers to slow down. Some did. Many, in the way people do on a familiar interstate under a sky that doesn't look that different from any other overcast day, didn't slow down enough. The first crash was an ordinary one. 6 to 8 vehicles tangled in the southbound lanes. Then, the traffic behind them entered the fog bank at highway speed with almost no warning at all, and kept arriving too fast to stop. 17 separate collisions inside a single mile of road. By the time the fog finally lifted, 95 vehicles had been pulled into the wreckage. At the center of it sat a cluster of roughly 8 vehicles that had caught fire together. Close enough that responders afterward described it as the epicenter of the whole event. 3 people did not survive. William Sosby, 33, from Allen, Kentucky. Catherine Worley, 71, of Iron Station, North Carolina. Andrew Catby, 24 from Delphos, Ohio, 25 more people were injured seriously enough to need a hospital. School buses were brought in to carry stranded travelers to shelters and hotels for the night, because there was simply no way to move an 8-mile backup safely in either direction. The interstate stayed closed, both ways, for the better part of a day. Barely 6 months later, the mountain did it again, and this time the story belonged specifically to trucking. September 21st, 2013, just before 11 in the morning. Mist and fog had cut visibility to roughly 25 feet. A northbound tractor trailer came up on stopped traffic ahead of him. He braked. A second tractor trailer behind him couldn't stop in time and hit him from behind, and the impact spun the first truck sideways, jackknifing it across every northbound lane. 80 feet of steel turned into a wall. A third tractor trailer hit that wall next. 2 passenger cars and a motorcycle were pulled in after that. 1 person died. 25 feet of visibility on a road posted for 70 miles an hour is not really visibility at all. It is closer to driving with your eyes shut and hoping. The years without a headline pileup have their own quiet toll. A tractor trailer pulling double trailers rolled on the southbound curves near mile marker 22 in the fall of 2023, killing the driver. Single truck wrecks, multi-rig pileups, roadside fires, they show up in the local incident logs for this 12-mile stretch with a regularity that would be strange almost anywhere else on the interstate system. Some years bring another mass casualty pileup. Every year brings something. Add it up, and the shape of the pattern is hard to miss. 1977, 2 deaths in 2000, 2 in 2010, 3 in March of 2013, 1 that September. A driver lost on the curve in 2023. Across roughly 4.5 decades, this single 6-mile stretch has produced at least half a dozen separate mass casualty or fatal multi-vehicle events, on top of the smaller wrecks that never make news outside Carroll County. No other comparable length of I-77 across 4 states and nearly 600 miles comes close. The mountain isn't unlucky, it's consistent. Before we get to what the state finally did about it, and what this mountain looks like right now, this is roughly the middle of the story, so if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more roads still ahead. Back to Fancy Gap. The industry has the numbers to back up what the drivers already know by instinct. An analysis of federal crash data from the Fatality Analysis Reporting System covering 2011 through 2015 ranked Interstate 77 as the 5th most dangerous interstate in the country for truckers specifically, based on fatal crashes in rain or snow. Over that 5-year window, the highway averaged 4.4 fatalities per 100 miles in those conditions, 27 total deaths. That ranking covers the entire 600-mile length of I-77 across 4 states, which makes it that much more telling that so much of the damage concentrates on this one 12-mile Virginia crossing. Dispatchers who route freight through the region know the mountain by reputation. Drivers who've made the run before know it firsthand. And on a road like this, reputation turns into caution. Timing a departure to miss the fog-prone hours around dawn and dusk, checking conditions before committing to the descent, treating a routine climb like it deserves a second look instead of cruise control and a podcast. The state didn't jump straight to cameras and automated signs. Years earlier, in the early 2000s, Virginia's Transportation Research Council had already convened a panel of state police and highway officials specifically to study fog on this mountain and its sister corridor at Afton Mountain. And the panel's own recommendations, buried in a technical report most drivers will never read, read almost like a checklist of everything that was still missing at the time, Warning signs placed further back from the fog-prone zones. Video cameras so officials could actually confirm how bad conditions were before advising the public, heavier police presence to enforce the advisory speeds that already existed on paper. And, notably, a request for authorization to experiment with variable speed limits, years before the technology to do it automatically actually went in. The knowledge that this mountain needed a real-time system, not just better signage, existed more than a decade before the 2013 pileup forced the money to finally follow it. The state eventually tried to engineer its way around the problem it couldn't legislate away. After the 2013 pileup, VDOT approved a contract, ultimately finalized around $7.5 million, to build what officials called an active traffic and safety management system along the 12-mile corridor from the North Carolina border north past the Fancy Gap exit. 76 new signs, a network of traffic cameras, weather and visibility detection stations feeding data back to a VDOT operations center in Salem. Roughly 17.5 miles of fiber optic cable to tie it all together. The system went live in October of 2016. The concept is simple. When visibility along the corridor drops to 600 feet or less, the posted speed limit falls automatically with it, down to as low as 30 miles an hour in the worst conditions, buying drivers more time and distance to react to whatever the fog is hiding. Researchers with the Virginia Transportation Research Council later studied its effect and found that before the system went in, drivers in fog were traveling, on average, at roughly twice the speed that stopping distance math said was actually safe. After it activated, that gap closed measurably. It did not close completely, because you cannot engineer away a weather pattern. You can only give people more warning and hope they use it. The system works in the way a seatbelt works. It does not prevent the crash. It changes the odds of what happens after. VDOT's own before and after research on this corridor makes that distinction explicit. Drivers still enter fog too fast, on average, but not nearly as fast as they used to. And in a chain reaction pileup, the difference between 40 miles an hour and 65 miles an hour at the moment of first contact is often the difference between a fender bender and a fatality. That is the honest way to describe what 76 signs and a fiber optic network bought this mountain. Not safety. A better set of odds. And the mountain keeps testing those odds. Just before 5 in the morning on November 30th, 2025, in the dark near mile marker 8, close to the top of the grade, a pickup truck traveling north in the left lane struck the back of a tractor trailer during wintry weather and was thrown into the median. Moments later, a Tesla changing lanes in the same stretch struck a second tractor trailer, spun back across the interstate, and struck the first one too. The driver of the Tesla, 26-year-old Dylan Hammond of Columbus, Ohio, died at the scene. He was wearing his seatbelt. Investigators looked at whether ice in the dark at elevation had played a role. Mile marker 8. Before dawn. 2 tractor trailers already stopped or slowed on the grade, exactly where they were supposed to be, when the darkness and the weather turned an ordinary morning commute into something neither driver behind them ever recovered from. The exact hours this whole story has been describing. Today, the corridor is still active, still watched around the clock, still capable of dropping from 65 to 30 with almost no notice. The camera network that VDOT built to manage the road has become something else too. A resource drivers and dispatchers check before they ever reach the mountain, pulling up live footage of the summit to see whether the fog wall is sitting on the ridge that day before committing to the climb. It's a small habit, and it exists for one reason. Enough people learned, the hard way, that Fancy Gap on a clear morning and Fancy Gap an hour later can be two completely different roads. The 3 runaway ramps are still there too. Gravel worn smooth by the trucks that needed them and the drivers who practiced finding them just in case. Quietly waiting for the next driver whose brakes have already made the decision his foot no longer can. On a clear day, this 6-mile climb through the Blue Ridge is genuinely beautiful. One of the more scenic interchanges on the entire interstate system, long views opening up as you gain elevation. The Blue Ridge Parkway crossing quietly overhead. That is, in a way, the most dangerous thing about it. A road that looks dangerous gets treated with respect. A road that looks like an ordinary interstate drive, right up until the exact second it isn't, gets driven at highway speed by people who have no idea what they're about to enter. Picture it from the seat for a second. You crest the approach in bright afternoon sun, cruise control set, 600 miles still ahead of you on the schedule. The kind of ordinary drive you've done 100 times on 100 other interstates. The grade starts, gentle at first, the third climbing lane peeling off to your right for the slower trucks. Nothing ahead looks unusual. Then, somewhere in that 6-mile stretch, the light changes color. The trees at the shoulder go soft at the edges, and before you've consciously decided to worry about anything, your headlights are bouncing straight back at you off a wall of gray. Everything you were counting on a second ago, the taillights ahead, the lane markings, your own sense of your speed is suddenly unreliable all at once. Your foot comes off the accelerator before your brain has finished processing why. That is the exact moment every piece of this corridor, the signs, the sensors, the falling speed limit, the ramps carved into the shoulder, exists to buy you a little of. Not comfort, just time. If you ever find yourself approaching Fancy Gap from the south, watch for the signs well before that 6-mile marker begins, and take the posted speed seriously even when the sky ahead looks clear. On this mountain, clear can turn into 25 feet of visibility faster than you can safely slow down, and daylight can turn into black ice before sunrise without ever announcing itself. 600 feet is the number the state uses to trigger a warning. It might not be the number that saves you. That one is smaller, and it depends entirely on how fast you were willing to go before you knew what was waiting on the other side of the fog, or the dark. The sign will still be there the next time you drive it, and the time after that, doing exactly what it has always done, telling you a number, and trusting you to do something with it before the mountain decides for you. If you've ever driven this stretch, or one like it, tell me where, and tell me what you saw. I'll see you on the next road.